Everyone. This is B. Wendy Jackson. I am here representing Empower to Empower You podcast. And just for those of you who are tuning in for the first time, Empower to Empower You podcast is about all things Jesus Christ, mental health, and anything to help you improve your overall well being. I really love that each podcast episode is packed with information, inspiration, and encouragement. And I've been podcasting for this year makes 5 years. So I really love to have, a lot of here on the podcast, just sharing great information that can really help stimulate your thinking, maybe change your thinking, or just give you direction as it relates to faith and mental health related topics, or just overall well-being. Today, I am so honored to have Gordon Brewer here today. He serves. I love to ask the question, how do you serve? And so I'm going to share a little bit about Gordon's bio. He serves as a therapist, a licensed marriage and family therapist. He's a podcaster. He's a trainer. He's also a supervisor. And he is the person behind the Practice of Therapy podcast. He also started another podcast called Kindness and Compassion podcast. And Gordon also is the owner and director of a group practice called Kingsport Counseling Associates. He's here in Kingsport, Tennessee. And so he's also a clergy. He's a clergy of the Episcopal Church. And so we're going to talk about mental health faith and mental health from a perspective of a minister. And so I'm really, really glad to have you here, Gordon. Obviously, I did not share your whole bio. Take us the whole podcast. You have over 30 years of practice of serving in the faith and mental health space. Is that right?
Yeah, that would be pretty close. I'm always amazed at how long I've been doing this, but yes.
And you're getting younger and younger.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
At the beginning of, I remember being on your podcast. What was that?
Yes.
So
a few times. Yeah.
Yes. So it's so good to have you here today. Of the 30 years, if I were to ask you what's been the most rewarding or what is rewarding in maybe in this season of your life, what would you say?
Yeah. Well, it's, as a therapist, I think one of the things, certainly in my life, and I think everybody's journey is unique, and I think there are a lot of different paths that we can take. But at least in my own experience, my getting into the therapy world and becoming a therapist, a licensed therapist, and that sort of thing. What has influenced me, I guess, to stay with it is I realize, as you kind of mentioned, Wendy, just for me personally, is that intersection between my faith and also what I do day in and day out to help people. And really, when you think about it, I like to think of it as listening to people's stories, helping people with the things that they're working on and the things that they're dealing with is really sacred ground for me and my because people can bring us some very heavy stuff, and I think that the way that we get through that is through community, through having those connections, and in my own faith tradition, I would say that community and those connections is what represents the body of Christ.
Yeah.
And so I think that is very much informs who I am. I don't, I tell people that I don't say that I'm a faith-based counselor because I do take a very clinical approach with people. although I do, as you mentioned in the bio, I am a clergy person in the Episcopal Church, and so I wear that hat as well. And I tell people I don't have a religious agenda with what I do in my counseling, but if those are things that you want to talk about or need to talk about, I'm happy to talk about that, and we can explore those things. And
Yeah,
but Wendy, it's pretty interesting how that comes up a lot, and that
I am
people
sure.
are yeah, people are as I like to say, where I live, and I forget where you're located, Bewendy, but I'm in East Tennessee, which is right in the Appalachian Mountains, and I like to say we're the belt buckle of the Bible Belt. And so, um, I think a lot of times people uh, can be handed things growing up. I mean, I think maybe with good intentions, but also people experience spiritual abuse as well. I mean, they're um, handed things that are just um, hard to deal with internally, with their own life's experience, and then also, their faith backgrounds and that sort of thing, and just trying to integrate that into who they are. You
Yeah, that's so
know.
true. Absolutely.
I hope I answered your question.
You did. No, you did. I love how you said you take it seriously.
Hmm.
It's not a joke, right? It's not something we
Hmm.
like to play with. This is a mantle that we get to carry. This is not just a job. It's not just a career.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
always explain to people that being a counselor is a calling. Being a
Hmm.
therapist is a calling. To be able to be in a position to hold space with people who are hurting at their
Hmm.
worst, coming to you to be able to help facilitate some form of healing or some form of help. Right now,
Right.
in our case, we know that the healer is I'm not the healer, you're not the healer, but we can point them to the healer. And so that's
Hmm.
Jesus Christ, right? That's the only healer that I
Hmm.
know. And so it is definitely, I love how you call that sacred ground. How do you see mental health, or, showing up even in your congregation, or even if you're not doing faith-based counseling per se, but I'm sure even in the church as you serve, how do you see mental health needs popping up in the church or just among your faith-based community?
Yeah. Well, it quite honestly, in the same way, many of the same ways it does um, in the secular world, I guess you could say, or out in the world. It's not, the people live in both places, and I think, there's in my church, um, there's a sign over the door as you go out that says you're now entering the mission field, and so I think one of the ways in which we can help as a faith community is to give people a safe place, um, just to be who they are and to be know that they are loved and know that there's community there. But mental health can show up in any number of ways, just like it does, out in the world within within churches, within faith communities. Um, I think for me, most people, the congregation I'm assigned to now is aware of what I do. I mean, they know that I'm a therapist, and so I get, a lot of times people, will ask me about things, or they'll maybe want to come, you know, come to my practice, see me, or see somebody in my practice. But I think it's as much as anything, it's about just holding a safe space for people to um, be able to talk about mental health in such a way um, that doesn't stigmatize it. And I think that
Absolutely.
I think that's one of the things. Again, um, I think I know a lot of people have a lot of different views on this, but I think one of the most harmful things that you could tell someone is that they wouldn't have a mental health problem if their faith was just strong enough. And
Absolutely.
I think that's a terrible thing to say to someone.
Mhm.
because I think that you know um, God promises to be with us along
Yeah.
the way, and
Mhm.
the truth of the matter is we're all broken. We're
Mhm.
all we
Mhm.
all have
Mhm.
we're all we all have the privilege of having God's grace come into our lives. And I think, at least for me, that is my job, that is my calling, is to show grace, to show
Mhm.
compassion, and to
Mhm.
give people um, a space to know that they can heal and that they're not going to be alone.
Absolutely. And the reality is, we know you mentioned earlier that there's so much church hurt, right? And we also know that
Mm.
there are people, it's not like Christians are walking up admitting that they have a mental health need, right?
Hmm.
They may not even be, they may not even have the permission to even admit and acknowledge. They
Hmm.
know there are
Hmm.
many people who are believers in the church community or even outside of a church community who are experiencing mental health concerns. It may look like depression. It may look like, even coping with grief. It may look like anxiety, but are they
Hmm.
coming out forward and saying, I need somebody? Or are they
Hmm.
been affected by those statements, those biases, those the stigma statements of, well, just pray about it. Or
Yeah.
there's so much shame about, I shouldn't be asking for a therapist because I'm a Christian, I'm a faith leader, I'm a worship leader,
Hmm.
I know God,
Hmm.
right? And so there are
Hmm.
lots of people that are not necessarily raising their hand and saying, listen, I need some help. And what does that say
Right.
about me that I need help? Right. And
Right.
so it's so good to have people in the position, or even churches that acknowledge the need for focusing on mental health, that being
Hmm.
saved does not mean you are whole. Being saved does
Hmm.
not mean you are healed. It doesn't mean that you don't have issues, right? And so, and having Jesus can also come along with having a therapist. You can have both. And so are some of the
Hmm.
things that I always have to say out loud.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Well, one of the things I get the privilege to preach every now and then, and one of the things that uh, I'll tell stories and that sort of thing, and I'll use myself as an example. I said, I was talking to my therapist the other day, and
That's good.
one of the things for anyone that's a therapist, I think you need to be in therapy and you need to continue to do that. The other thing too, and just the faith uh, realm is, and a lot of times they can overlap. I know it does for me, but getting spiritual direction as well, being able to have someone to talk about, you know, your questions about your faith, or the places that you struggle with your faith, or,
Mhm. Mhm.
how can you live into your faith more in a more genuine way, and that sort of thing, and just understanding, what it means to follow Christ, in the Christian context, and all of that. How do you incorporate and integrate that into your life day in and day out? And
Yeah.
so there, in many ways, I think that, at least for me personally, they overlap. I'm fortunate enough to have a spiritual director that's also, he's retired now, but he was a clinical psychologist. So, I mean, we
Oh, you
had
have it
the
good.
best, yeah, the best of both worlds with that. So, but
Yeah,
I think, particularly those in leadership in the church are, um, need need to do their own work. Yeah, I mean,
absolutely.
that was, yeah,
Mm. That
yeah.
is such a great point. I love how you emphasize that you also model that you also seek, just because you are a faith leader and a counselor leader, you're a director, you're a
Mm,
supervisor, you're doing the work. You're on the battlefield of doing this work, but you also say,
mhm,
what, I have a therapist. I also have a spiritual director that's holding me accountable, that's helping me to process. And so that's such a great reminder for us to make sure. Since you
mhm,
said that it is sacred ground, and the work is heavy, it's heavy to
mm,
hold space for people. It's
mhm,
heavy to walk with people and to be with people in an empathic way. There's lots of
mhm,
compassion. I don't believe we can do this work without compassion. And when we think about
right.
what compassion is, it's love in action. And with all of that, right, comes the risk of burnout and compassion
Mm-hmm.
fatigue,
Mm-hmm.
exhaustion. And so I'm just curious, how do you stay grounded? You've been doing this longer than I have, Gordon. How do you stay grounded?
So I think one of the things is having daily rituals. My prayer life is very important to me, and also study of scripture is important. I think all of those things, and having something built in to
Yeah,
where you are have a daily practice. So for me, most every morning, unless weather prohibits, I'm out walking in nature, and I'm either listening to there's a podcast. It's a great little podcast that I found, and it's called Pray as You Go, and it comes from a Roman Catholic tradition, but it's really great stuff. It's just if people are familiar with the term lecta divina, where you listen to uh, a passage of scripture and then you just reflect on that, and then you listen to it again or read it again, and then
mhm,
you just meditate and pray around that particular scripture. And it's
mhm.
usually just a small little bite, but it's to me it plants a seed that kind of, as you mentioned, being grounded. That's my kind of go back to, because like everybody else have hard days, hard times, and going through that. And I think one of the things too is um, and you probably know part of my story, but Wendy, I know, and I don't mind sharing this. In 2023, I lost my wife. She had like a 15-year battle with breast cancer and just all that went with that. And so I was in a caregiver role and all of that sort of thing. And the only thing that got me through that was being grounded in my prayer life, but also having the community of faith around me that would support me and lifted me up through all of that. And I think that's so important, is not to let your, it's easy to get yourself isolated, but
Yeah,
just having people that you can talk about those things. And
yeah,
being connected in a faith community, I think, is really important. Whatever that looks like for you. I no judgment here. It just I think God speaks to us in so many different ways. Otherwise, we wouldn't have so many denominations. But yeah, um,
yeah.
so
No,
but
thank
and I think, yeah, and I think too, not to get not as we used to say, don't get too big for your britches
you.
when it
Mhm.
comes to all of that, because I think there's lots of different ways to see the world and see what it means to follow Christ.
No, I'm so sorry for your loss, and I had no idea.
Yeah,
Thank you for
thank you.
sharing it with me.
Hmm.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
as you're walking with people, I can imagine how many people that you're walking through that are also navigating grief and that are
Hmm.
navigating anger at God, right? Like,
Hmm. Hmm.
it's if you could, what are some ways that you help a person walk through this space where they're basically saying, "I'm angry." They're not
Yeah.
plugged into a community. They're
Hmm.
isolating. They're definitely not doing scripture reading because they're angry. They're angry at God because their
Hmm.
perception is
Yeah.
God took my loved one. So, what are some
Yeah.
ways that you help navigate that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, I think it's okay to be angry at God, because God's big enough to handle it, and
Mhm.
God understands it at a level that we're maybe not able to understand it. And I think too, that's a big issue that people struggle with too. Why did God let that happen?
Yeah.
And again, and not to get into too much theology, but it's a two different ways of thinking about God. Is God the great puppet master that orchestrates and controls everything that happens on earth or with us? Or is God the benevolent clock maker that put the world into motion and the universe into motion? And I think, one of the things that I think it's kind of a universal tenet with most Christians is that God gives us free will, and that we we're able to make decisions about how we want to direct our lives, and we can turn towards it or we can turn away from it. And I think being able to turn toward it, God understands our grief. God knows what it's like to grieve. I mean, again, a Christian perspective, God watched His Son die on a cross, and you know, you know for our redemption. And so you might not be able to get your head around all of that, but I would say absolutely lean into the idea that you're not alone.
Yeah.
And even in any relationship, you're going to get angry. And I think it's okay to be angry with God, because God's big enough to handle that. And God
Absolutely.
understands things at a level that we can't necessarily understand or make sense out of. It's kind of like
Mhm.
I heard it put this way one time, is that you know, I have two cats, pets at home, and I love them, and they know I love them.
Mhm.
But for me to explain to them and for them to understand how to operate this computer, it's not going to happen.
Right.
But what I do know is that I'm present with them and that I take care of them. And there are things that I do to take care of them that they don't understand or can't comprehend. I
Mhm.
dare say, when I have to take them to the vet to get their shots, they don't understand why this painful thing is happening to them. But I understand it at a level they could not. So I don't know
Yeah.
if that's helpful in that, yeah.
Yeah,
And that there's
absolutely.
things that we can never understand. I don't think
Mhm.
that God, you know, I think we've got to be careful about what we say to people about, you know, particularly with grief, saying to someone, well, God needed them more than you did, or, you know, there's a purpose behind it, or there's a greater meaning behind it, or
Yeah.
whatever. I just, you know, quite frankly, I don't know that, but I
Right.
just know that I'm not alone, and that
Absolutely.
that's that's the best we can do, is just be there with people. And that's what Jesus did. He didn't, he certainly, he healed the sick, he helped people, but there were times when Jesus didn't make it better or fix it, but he
Right.
was there with them. Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there are some erroneous statements that I've heard worse than what you said, that God needed a rose in heaven.
Hmm.
There's some really ridiculous things that people say, and it's
Hmm.
almost like the first 7 days. The first 7 days, that's a whole nother message for another day. But the
Hmm.
first
Hmm.
7 days of Job's suffering, first seven
Hmm.
days, his friends did amazing. They didn't do anything. They didn't say anything. They were quiet.
Hmm.
After those 7 days, that's when yeah, don't follow Job's friends after the first 7 days. Somebody needs to
Right.
do it. I'm sure there's a book on this, but you're right, and this all stems to brokenness, and we can go into this a little bit further. But unfortunately,
Hmm.
as a result of sin, as a result of sin stemming into brokenness, bad things happen, and because we live in
Hmm.
a world and we cannot understand or even begin to understand things, and it's hard. It will be very hard for me to navigate suffering if I perceive God as a God who hurt me, right?
Hmm.
Uh, but
Hmm.
so there's an issue with the perception for sure, and that's where walking through a
Hmm.
counselor like myself, like you, to really help show them to help walk with them compassionately and help reframe that perspective of who God is really, right? And to
Hmm.
hopefully reframe that as people navigate pain and hurt and
Hmm.
suffering. Yeah.
Right.
So let me
Right.
pivot a second, because I know
Hmm.
our time is coming upon us. So I just love your work in terms of, you're navigating, you have the beautiful intersection of faith and mental health. And I really want to say thank you for your service in doing that for
Hmm.
sure. Um, this is, I don't know if you want to speak to this. This is completely random, but can you imagine being retired from your work? Like, have you thought
Hmm.
about what that looks like?
Well, actually, I have been thinking a lot about that, because I'm approaching that age. But I think, I like the word pivot. I see myself. I see myself continuing to be part of church, whether I'm,
Right. Absolutely.
serving actively as a clergy person or not. I will always be involved in church just because that's who I am. Um, but I think you pivot into other things. Like I see myself, doing volunteer work, all of those kinds of things that are no less important. But
Right.
yeah, so I mean, I don't think retirement necessarily means just stopping
Right.
what you're doing,
Right.
but it transforms. It becomes something different. Well,
Absolutely.
even in my own practice in my own ministry, it has transformed a lot over the
Mhm.
years. I mean, it's
Yes.
not how it was when I started, and so
Right.
it transforms. And I think doorways open up for us, opportunities open up for us that we might not even imagine, and so we move towards those. Um, for for,
Absolutely.
for example, when I first went into
Glue. Well,
first
why
went
would
into ministry,
they think gluten free then? If they know the glue, because flour and water make
uh-oh.
paste. That's that paste
I
is
don't know where this is coming from.
Oh my goodness. I don't either.
That was weird.
Uh-huh.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. I don't hear that anymore. So hopefully you can
Okay,
edit that
good.
out. Yeah.
That was weird. Yes. That's
Yeah.
okay. We'll just treat it as a commercial break. So yes, I'm
Uh,
excited to hear more about you pivoting later on because
mm,
we do go through seasons for sure, and then
mhm.
things change, things evolve for
Right.
sure. So that's going to
Right.
be very interesting. If we
Yeah.
could just kind of wrap up, give us a quick minute overview of where people can connect with you and what's the difference between the practice of therapy, just a 1 minute overview, practice of therapy
Hmm.
podcast versus the kindness and compassion podcast. And I believe
Yes.
you have a Sightcraft network of podcasts. So
Yes,
just
I
give us
do.
a
I
1 minute
do. Yes.
overview. Yes.
Yes. So, my primary podcast is the Practice of Therapy podcast, and it's really geared more towards therapists and counselors and social workers and people that are mental health providers and helping them navigate the world of being in private practice, the business side and the marketing and all of those kinds of things that are needed in order to have a successful practice. The Kindness and Compassion podcast, unfortunately, I've not. I am going to pick that up, but I have not, due to all the stuff that I've gone through with my wife and that sort of thing. I kind of shelved it for a while, but there are, I think, 20, 25 episodes there. But
Okay.
the Kindness and Compassion podcast looks at the intersection between faith and psychology and self help and all of those kinds of things, and how we can live into more kindness and compassion in our
Mhm.
lives and in our world and our interactions with others. And so
Love that.
that's the main theme of that one. And then the Sightcraft Network is just a network of independent podcasters. And I started it a couple of years ago. Well, it's been almost 3 years ago now, just to give podcasters like yourself, Wendy, a place for to get support and just talk about kind of the behind the scenes of running a podcast and helping people cross promote and support each other in that whole medium and that sort of thing, and find advertisers and sponsors and all that sort of thing. And
Yeah.
so but the practice of therapy, you can just simply go to practiceoftherapy.com. Kindness and compassion is kindness and compassion uh, podcast.com. And then the Sightcraft Network is sightcraftnetwork.com.
Awesome. And people can definitely find you. Did you say practiceoftherapy.com?
Yes, practiceoftherapy.com. Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. You are such a mentor, and everything that you do is
Mm-hmm.
you don't just serve, but you also serve and lead and serve and mentor, serve and direct, serve and so you're doing a multi level of serving for sure. So thank you for your
Yes.
mentorship
Well,
of new
well,
therapists that can learn so much from your practice of therapy podcast and even the site craft for new podcasters and so on and so forth. Yes,
Uh-huh.
Gordon, thank
Yes.
you. So, is there
Hmm.
any final thought that you have, or you want, or you feel compelled to share? Maybe any word of encouragement for the person who's struggling in their faith, or for the person who's struggling
Hmm.
in the work of therapy? They're burned out, they're tired. Any final word of
Hmm.
encouragement that you wish to give before we end?
Well, I think one of the things is, give yourself some grace around the struggles that you might have. And I think as much as anything is not to isolate yourself. Seek out people that can understand, and people that can you can talk to. And you know, I think there's, like I said earlier, there are a lot of different paths to finding peace, finding meaning in your life. And I think those are the important things. I'm always reminded of Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. And really the whole crux of that is that all of us need meaning in our lives in order to be healthy and be connected and that sort of thing. So
Absolutely. Yes.
yeah.
Well, Gordon, it has been such a pleasure to have you on the Empower to Empower You
Well,
podcast
it's
today.
been great to be here.
Thank you so much. And y'all continue to tune in. Please check out this Practice of Therapy podcast, as well as the Sightcraft network of podcasts and the Kindness and Compassion podcast. I'm sure you could just go on, you could Google it, you can Spotify it, iTunes it. I'm
Right.
sure it's for, yes, for sure. So
Yes. Uh-huh.
this is Wendy Jackson with the Empower to Empower You podcast. Thank you so much for listening. And don't forget to rate and review. I'll be back next time. Thank you.